what I know is that people think it's happening, and trying to resolve some of the perception is
People think somebody else won the election too, but doesn't mean it's true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a question, but it's going to take a while to get to it. So the numbers that the previous speaker cited, I'm not sure where they come from, but in the written testimony, someone actually cites a number of only 5,487 ballots that were received during the period that would now be excluded by this bill. So I'm not exactly sure what those large numbers come from, but this one is footnoted based on the Secretary of State's numbers. But to your point, Representative Esau, I think it's a very valid one, that it undermines confidence in the election system when elections are overturned after Election Day by these ballots that continue to trickle in or get counted after Election Day. I'm aware of two folks that are not our colleagues right now because their elections were overturned after Election Day. Do you know of any specific elections that were overturned after the election by these ballots that continue to trickle in for days?
I believe there were two. There may have been others that I'm not recalling at this moment, but I believe there were two that someone appeared to be winning on Election Day. The next day it flipped. I believe there was even another one that flipped back. And it was that kind of going back and forth where I started getting emails from folks, social media contacts, et cetera, within Kansas going, what's going on? Why are we counting these people who voted after the election? And it doesn't matter if you explain it to them, they're convinced that something must have been going on.
Mr. Chair, if I could, and do you think that there's an overriding public good in people having confidence that the elections are free and fair and that we're not counting ballots that shouldn't be counted?
Absolutely.
All right. Representative Miller.
Just as a matter of correction, I think the ones that were flipped as a result of provisional ballots, and those, we're not doing anything with provisional ballots. Those ballots are still going to get counted long after the Friday that we're talking about here. That's the ones I'm aware of this year that were actually flipped because of provisionals, not because of the mail-ins. Thank you.
If you'd like to address it, you can. I didn't hear a question there.
I do believe there was at least one in Johnson County, I would have to go look it up, that changed day by day. Now, I referenced this in my written testimony. My count went up. So for me, I should be happy to accept additional ballots as they come in. So it's not personal, it's simply a shorter cutoff window.
Committee, are there further questions? Representative Dodson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit conflicted by this because I agree with what's been said that we have to have faith in our elections. That's key. But now we have little faith in the ability of our post office to deliver on time. Did you give any consideration for having a different cutoff date for those who mail in? In other words, we're trying to deal with this span of time from when, if they stamp this the day of the election and it doesn't make it by the cutoff time, they're not going to be counted at 5 p.m. rather than midnight or some other time. Have we given any consideration for changing the cutoff at the beginning so that it has a reasonable chance of making it to the election committee that's counting these ballots by a time certain?
I think I understand your question, and you're basically saying if you're going to mail your ballot in, that you have to have mailed it, say, by Saturday before the election or Friday before the election. No, I did not consider that, simply because I know there are a lot of people that go, where's my ballot? They're digging through their mail trying to find it, and they're willing to actually even drive that ballot to the election office or to their polling place on Election Day. So there's so many ways they still could turn it in, even if they can't trust the post office. So probably the thing we would have to do then is to educate the public, don't mail your ballot late, which is the very thing the post office was telling everyone. They were given, I think, a week or 10 days saying, you need to get it in that soon.
Thank you.
Committee, are there further questions for the proponent? I'm seeing none. Thank you, Representative, for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Are there any other additional proponents for House Bill 2319? Seeing no additional proponents, the chair closes the proponent section, and the chair will now open the opponents section, and the chair recognizes Mike Burgess, Disability Rights Center of Kansas. Welcome to committee.
So I'm going to ask, since she's the closest one, is it okay if I remove my mask to speak, or can everybody hear me okay, I guess? Maybe that's it. Maybe it'll be unnecessary. Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. We'll be very, very brief. Having previously, a number of years ago, been in your shoes, we met in a different committee room at that time, but certainly appreciate the importance of having safe and secure elections, while at the same time balancing the accessibility of elections. So I'm now currently the Director of Policy and Outreach at the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. I've been there for around 6 years now. And we're a nonprofit advocacy agency we provide no-cost, legally based advocacy services to individuals with disabilities. So most of our organizations are attorneys and advocates. Think of attorneys and paralegals who do provide direct casework. Part of our federal law that created us empowers us and requires us to do systemic advocacy around individuals with disabilities. So today, I'm here just to talk about how the nexus of this bill and its potential impact on individuals with disabilities. So obviously, a number of individuals with disabilities are on the permanent advance ballot, as well as there's a lot of other ones who just choose to vote by mail when they want to, or sometimes vote in person. So it's not, you can't necessarily just assume that everyone is in one camp or the other. It's an individual's right to disclose their disability or not. So, but the issue that we run into for those who advance vote, a number of them do advance vote by mail, and they would likely be more likely to not have their votes counted. And I think as some of the questions that I was able to hear earlier, the question about the mail is, as the USPS has closed mail sorting services, or mail sorting centers. So you used to be able to just drop it in the mail and the next day it would be there and it would be at your spot. Well, nowadays, that mail ends up, driving a number of miles to be sorted, to be hauled right back so it can be delivered, a few buildings down in some cases. And unfortunately, that takes a lot more time than it used to. And that is my concern with this bill, or our concern as the Disability Rights Center. This would negatively impact individuals with disabilities. And so that's why we're here to oppose this change. And I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Committee, we will be holding the questions until after we hear from all the opponents. So if you could, just stick around. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right, next, the chair recognizes Michael Popa, Executive Director of the Mainstream Coalition.
Good afternoon, Chair Barker and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to appear virtually before you today. As you have a copy of our written testimony as well, my remarks will be brief as possible. The Mainstream Coalition opposes HB 2319, and we beg the question, why? There is no evidence that this bill is warranted. Even Secretary of State Schwab is on record stating that there was no instance of voter fraud in the 2020 Kansas elections. We're very concerned about the bill's inflexibility. It would prevent any court or elected official, including Secretary of State or county election officials whose job it is to oversee and carry out fair elections, from extending the deadline due to a natural disaster or any other emergency. And then frankly, it seems this bill is discriminatory by not providing advanced mail voters the same opportunity to have their voice counted as those who are able to vote in person. So simply put, HB 2319 is a solution, if you will, looking for a problem that does not exist. Representative Esau stated earlier that nobody wants to disqualify a qualified ballot. And I think we can all agree with that, but that's exactly what would happen if this passes. No matter the intent of this bill, it would disenfranchise, as we heard, thousands of Kansans and strip them of their rights to vote and have that vote counted. I urge you to oppose this bill and instead support legislation that increases equitable access to voting. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next, the chair recognizes Davis Hammett, Loud Light Civic Action Group.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman Carpenter and members of the committee for letting me speak on this bill. Obviously, there's three components to this, but I think the one we're going to hear the most about, I'll focus on, is the impact of reducing the time from 3 days to 1 day. We know that there's not only problems unique to the pandemic that have delayed mail, but this has been an ongoing problem. And also it's especially a problem in rural communities where mail can take longer. You know, if you're there, like Representative Esau who proposed the bill, if you're there in Johnson County, you might have a much greater access to this than you would, you know, in a much smaller county where several of our counties have about 2,000 people. So that's a big concern about the equitable access and how this will disproportionately impact different people. I do want to comment on some of the things I heard. I think it was Representative Proctor. First off, I appreciate that you read the testimony and could point that out. How I got that number was based on the Secretary of State's advanced returned mail ballot list that they release every day around election time. However, I will say that there could be numbers discrepancies because we don't have final official numbers. And in fact, the state of Kansas still hasn't finalized all of its election data for the 2020 election. Still, some counties are finalizing voter credit. And I think that actually raises more caution about making such dramatic changes because we probably don't yet have a final number of really being able to even understand this impact. So while we know it's undoubtedly thousands of people would have had their votes thrown out if the regime created under this bill was in place, we don't really know that impact. And we should be extremely careful about changing laws when we don't really even understand what the change would mean yet. Of course, also removing the Secretary of State's discretion to handle different emergencies is concerning. You could think of things like tornadoes or floods that we talked about that could destroy a street. You could also think about a terror attack that its specific purpose was to try to prevent mail ballots from being returned. It's important that we have discretion so that, you know, y'all aren't called into an emergency special session to deal with a tiny county that had a specific problem that the Secretary of State could have addressed. And then also this bill, again, attempts to say that the courts cannot be a part of it. And I also have a concern around the encroachment of the separation of powers, which I voiced before on other bills. There are a couple of points that the proponent, Representative Esau, made that I want to address. First off, 24/7 drop boxes are not actually available in all counties. That can vary greatly depending on what county you're in. And as far as mail ballots being mailed out 3 weeks in advance, we had such a backlog this year. There were people that were getting their mail ballot that they had requested months in advance, and they were getting the mail ballot on election day. And then also, whenever we talk about the public's misunderstanding of elections, I actually think this is a great responsibility on all of us, and especially y'all as elected officials, that election day results have never, ever meant anything. We use them whenever they're a huge number in margin to say it's clear this person won, but they have never been final results. And as the Secretary of State could share with you, they don't even actually have to release those numbers. Theoretically, the state of Kansas could withhold the election results, you know, until the actual canvass. So I think we have a strong obligation, instead of, you know, passing laws that could discriminate and suppress votes based on conspiracies and misunderstandings. We should instead seek to address those problems and educate the public. And, you know, a good alternative to this would be looking at something like mailing out ballots even earlier so that people are able to return them earlier. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions when appropriate. And thank y'all so much for your time.
Sir, the chair recognizes Kendall Seal, Director of Advocacy, American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas.
Thank you, Chairman Carpenter, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak. I'm Kendall Seal, Director of Advocacy for the ACLU of Kansas. We strongly oppose the passage of House Bill 2319. It's our belief that this bill will diminish trust in our democracy and elections. We want voters to have a good experience participating in democracy, to feel confident that their vote counts and is counted. This past election cycle in Kansas proved the value of flexibility in providing that good experience. Mail-in ballots are a viable, efficient, secure alternative to voting in person. Despite budget cuts and concerns about the Postal Service, anecdotal evidence suggests that most, maybe even all, of the mail-in ballots submitted in Kansas were postmarked by Election Day and received within 3 days. While this speaks to the diligence of our county clerks and the Postal Service, this is not a valid reason to remove all flexibility to adjust, if necessary, to ensure fair elections in times of natural disaster. Second of all, this bill fails to acknowledge that national disasters, pandemics, wars could affect the efficiency of our Postal Service. The United States Postal Service may not always be capable of delivering mail within a 3-day time frame. The example of what if a crisis strikes right around an election day. In such a scenario, you would want to adjust for interrupted mail service. If you pass this bill as written, you'll take that flexibility away and make government less responsive to its citizens' needs. Finally, and most importantly, this bill as is written is an overt act of voter suppression. There's no cogent reason for enacting the limits posed by this bill. It is a punishment to hardworking, civically minded Kansans who do their part to mail their ballots on time and who, in turn, expect every properly postmarked vote to count. This bill eliminates all flexibility when properly postmarked ballots may otherwise count, and it undermines the notion of basic fairness as an unsubtle eroding of the right to vote in Kansas. Thank you, Chairman, and we stand for questions.
All right, thank you. I have one more person listed. It is Rick Pifo, Elections Committee Chair, Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials.
Hopefully you can hear me. I submitted written testimony, and I'm not going to read it, but we don't believe that this needs to be changed. Currently, with receiving them up till Friday, which is the 3rd day after the election, that matches the USPS delivery standard for first-class mail is 1 to 3 business days. Now, most of the ballots are received on Wednesday, and then the numbers diminish Thursday and Friday. But moving this up to 5 p.m. Wednesday, it was mentioned that you could automatically assume if you get them on Wednesday that they were mailed before close of polls on election day. Well, but the statute doesn't remove that requirement, so it doesn't fix the postmark problem. If there's a proper postmark, even if it's received on Wednesday, it still cannot be counted if you can't verify that it was mailed before 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And I mean, in this past election, our numbers were, we had a total out of 6,800 in Harvey County, out of 6,820 total advance ballots returned, 2,328 were delivered or were returned by USPS. And 20 of those were delivered on Wednesday, 5 on Thursday, and 2 on Friday. And on Thursday and Friday, we were starting to get some that were postmarked, after the 7 p.m. So the numbers of valid went down and invalid went up, I guess. So our numbers were pretty small, but that was with media and everybody else encouraging people to get their mail. If they're going to mail it, get it mailed soon, or sooner rather than later. And we encourage everybody, because of the Postal Service, that if they're going to mail their ballot, that they mail it, return it sooner rather than later, and don't wait until the last minute. And ultimately, their deadline is still 7 p.m. on election day. But they want their vote to be counted. I mean, they're making the effort to vote, and they would like for it to be counted. I also agree with some of the others that on the point of removing the option for the Secretary of State to move the deadline, I don't think that it should be removed entirely. I don't think that you guys probably want to come in for a special session if something happens. Maybe it shouldn't be in just the hands of one person. Maybe it should be, upon Secretary of State with approval of the Finance Council or something. But I guess, thank you for letting me testify on behalf of the Kansas County clerks and election officials, and I'll stand for questions when appropriate.
All right, thank you. Appreciate all the opponent testimony. Committee, are there any questions for anybody who has testified as an opponent? The chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is not for anybody specific, but I would welcome any of the opponents to answer this question. But we heard different numbers, but some thousand of people whose ballots arrive after this deadline that is moved up from Friday would be disenfranchised with this change. And I feel like that assumes that people are not going to in any way modify their behavior in response to this bill. So my question is, the law did not used to say you had until the Friday after the election to get your ballot in. It used to be, it had to be here by election day. And so my question is, for any of the opponents, did we not have free and fair elections before that change? Were all those people just disenfranchised?
Anybody would like to raise their hands on their camera, I can recognize you if you'd like to answer that question. The chair recognizes Davis Hammett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that over the last 4 years, as we've spoken a lot in the last half hour about education, I know just, for example, the civic groups I work with produced videos and did texts and did contact to people and contacted hundreds of thousands of people explicitly explaining this 3-day thing. So I'm not saying anything about what happened 4 years ago and before that, but at this point, there are now Kansans who know about the 3 days, are accustomed to it, and many nonprofits and I'm sure campaigns have spent lots of resources educating people that this is how the Kansas law is. And so obviously that is the concern. And I think this is part of the Secretary of State's, whenever he plead with y'all not to change too much on the election law, is that people start to understand what the norm is. But most people, they're just living their life. They aren't like, oh, every year I expect all the election laws to change and to have to keep up with that. So I think that's a big concern. And also we did not have the same threats from delayed postal service as we had before.
Committee, are there further questions for the opponents? The chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple quick questions for Mr. Pifo.
Okay, I'm here.
Thank you. First, can you say one more time, what's the role under which you're appearing as a conferee?
All right, I am the Harvey County Clerk and Election Officer, but I'm appearing here on behalf of the Kansas County Clerks and Election Association. I'm the chair of their elections committee, which deals with elections legislation. And this is this testimony is based on our adopted platform.
Thank you. And in that role and in the work with that organization, are you aware of any counties that counted ballots that were not postmarked or otherwise barcoded by the post office?
I'm not aware of any. I mean, we even had a few situations here where it was difficult, even the next day on Wednesday, where you could tell that the post office was trying to do the right thing. Like say the Walton, somebody took it to the Walton post office, which is a little bitty post office. You know they closed before 5 p.m., but they round stamped the envelope, and the round stamp doesn't have a time on it. Well, being it was not indicated when it was mailed, even though we knew it had to be mailed before 5 p.m. or before 7 p.m. on Tuesday, we were not able to count those.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, are there further questions? The chair recognizes Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can anybody tell me what is the last day that the ballots are actually mailed to the house that the person is going to vote? What is the last day that they are mailed to the individual residents?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. The chair recognizes Rick Pifo.
The last day that they can apply for an advance ballot by mail is 1 week before the election. So effectively, we would mail those that day or the next day. It's just shy of 1 week at the last day that they're mailed out. And that was moved up from, it used to be the Friday before the election was the last day they could request it. But when this legislation was changed, backed up the day, last day to apply.
Thank
Recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Seal. Mr. Seal said that if we were to change this law, if we were to change the deadline, that it would erode public confidence that elections are free and fair. And I share Mr. Seal's absolute overriding concern that the public perception that elections are free and fair is really the overriding concern for all of us here on this committee. And so my question is, do you not think that an election result being overturned many, many days after Election Day erodes public confidence in the free fairness of our elections? As we heard from the proponent, that happened at least 2 times in this last election cycle in state house races.
Thank you, Representative, for the question. I think the important thing for all of us to keep in mind is that, we want every vote to count that's been mailed as of the election day. I think the trust that I'm speaking of is individual voters wanting the confidence to know that when they mark their ballot and they mail it in, that vote is going to be counted. And, I think it was actually that
We seem to be having some technical difficulties. Stand by. Mr. Seal, are you still there? We cannot hear you any longer. So everybody else appears to still be online and able to hear us. So it might just be Mr. Seal has dropped off, and we might just have to keep moving on. So if he comes back online, we'll allow him to finish. Committee, are there any further questions at this time for the opponents? Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the second attempt here. I just wanted to, a comment has been made a couple of times about overturning elections, and I wondered if the election official that we have on as a confrere, Mr. Pifo, could speak to that. When more ballots come in and we count them, in your mind as an election official, have we overturned the result of the day before? I mean, I guess, just give you an opportunity as an election official. How would you like, as we talk about educating the public, how would you like members of public to perceive that process as we get those updates day by day? Because to me, the idea of overturning them is actually using that sort of language itself is undermining confidence in the election.
I agree. I would not consider it overturning because elections are not final until after the canvass. Like Davis said, or Mr. Hammett said, that all the results that come out before the canvass are all preliminary results. We did actually have an instance here where a race a couple years ago did somewhat flip, or it did flip from election night to canvass, but it was only the preliminary results. The final results were the final results. And it just, we always have these days of receiving more ballots, and then we still have provisionals to count and canvass. But the results aren't final until we do the canvass. And we've always done that. It just became more obvious in the past few years with really tight races we've had on election night. Like that results were flipping or overturned, but it's all a part of the process. And elections are a process, not just a day.
Okay,
We start months in advance.
thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pifo, this question is for you. Are there deadlines for voter registrations?
21 days before the election.
So you do believe then that deadlines are important?
I agree.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Committee, are there further questions for the opponents? Seeing none, thank you to all the opponents for coming to testify today on House Bill 2319. The chair now closes the opponents section of House Bill 2319. I will point the committee towards 3 written opponents' testimony, and you can go read that when you have time. The chair now will open up the neutral section of House Bill 2319. Are there any oral neutral neutrals? I'm not seeing any. However, we do have a written only neutral from Katie Kapal, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. I see that she's online, so I would like to go ahead and ask her some clarifying questions real quick that came up earlier in this discussion. Ms. Kapal, could you please verify for us what the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday numbers were for the advanced ballots that came in after Election Day?
Yes, sir, and we'd be happy to provide it to the committee secretary as well in writing. So Election Day was Tuesday, November 3rd. The first day following the election, which is Wednesday, November 4th, there were 17,224 advanced by mail ballots received in the state of Kansas to the local election offices. The following day, Thursday, November 5th, 2020, there were 10,790 advanced by mail ballots received. And the final day that those ballots could be received, which was Friday, November 6th, 2020, 4,353 advanced by mail ballots were received in the local election offices.
Thank you, Ms. Kapal. Appreciate those numbers.
Sure.
Okay, so committee, I am not seeing any other neutrals at this time. So the chair now closes the neutral section of. All right, Representative Miller does have a question for Ms. Kapal.
Ms. Gopal, would you also give the number of those that came in after that weren't counted?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Approximately 400 advanced by mail ballots were received after the Friday deadline, statewide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kapal, do you guys have any record, or could you hunt down any record of how many ballots you used to get in before we moved the deadline to Friday from Election Day?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, could I get, I have a clarifying question. Are those received after the deadline in previous elections?
Right. So the previous representative asked you how many showed up in the last election after Friday, after the deadline. I'm wondering how many used to show up before the deadline, before you moved it to Friday. My point being that people modify their behavior in response to the rules that we make here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We do believe we have that information. I'd be happy to provide it to the committee in writing.
All right, so I do have a list going, just so everybody is aware of the order currently. I have Dodson, Parker, and Bourgeon. So the chair recognizes Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It appears on a timeline basis with the post office that if you mark your ballot on the day or before of the election, that it has virtually no chance of making it to the elector's office at the county by the next day. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Representative, would you repeat the question, please? This is Brian Caskey, Director of Elections for the state of Kansas.
So if we submit or sign our ballot as of the date of the election, when the polls close, put it in the mail, the expectation in the state of Kansas, given that our ballots have to, or the mail has to go to Kansas City first.
Continue your question.
That it has little chance of making it the day after the election.
If the ballot has a postmark on or before 7 p.m. on Tuesday, for first-class standard mail, the business service, the Postal Service regulations require that to be delivered in 2 to 5 business days currently. Those are Postal Service regulations.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Katie or Brian, whoever is appropriate for this one. I just wanted to repeat the question I asked Rick Pifo earlier. As the Secretary of State's office, are you all aware of any counties that went ahead and counted mail ballots without postmarks or barcodes on them?
I am not. I personally have talked about this issue with counties multiple times prior to both the 2020 primary election and the 2020 general election, as well as elections in 2018 and 2019. I am not aware of any county that did not follow the rules, and I personally talked about this with every county multiple times this year, or the last year.
I appreciate that, Brian. The reason I asked is because I know you all have done such good work on trying to make things as uniform as possible about the counties, and I think that's frankly been one of the very best things in the past couple of years, just to make sure that we can have that confidence county by county. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee, I'm going to limit this to the last question because we still have a bill that we have to work, and I would like to still try to get you guys out by 5 p.m. So the last person to ask a question on this will be, for the neutral or the Secretary of State's office, will be Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if the Secretary of State's office could tell us what the deadline is for county election officials to count provisional ballots, and also if there is a total number of provisional ballots that are counted after Election Day, and if so, how many?
So on question 1, counties begin the process of actually counting provisional ballots at the meeting of the County Board of Canvassers when they certify the election results. So it's actually at that meeting when provisional ballots are, when the determination is made on whether to count or not count. The first day that counties can do that is the Monday after the election. The last day that counties can do that is the second Monday after the election. So counties have the option at any time during that time period to convene the County Board of Canvassers, review provisional ballots, include them in the total, and certify the election. And I'm sorry, Representative Bourgeon, what was your second question?
Do we know how many provisional ballots were counted following Election Day, so after the election had happened?
Approximately 65% of all provisional ballots were counted after the 2020 general election.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, committee. We are, the chair is now going to close the neutral section of House Bill 2319, and I am officially closing the hearing on 2319. The committee will now shift over to House Bill 2051. This is a bill that we were delaying until that we delayed until today, last Thursday. And so, quickly, Mr. Heim, could you go ahead and give the committee a overview of 2051 again?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill deals with the appointment of a commissioner of insurance or state treasurer. Current law provides when there's a vacancy, the governor appoints. This bill would provide that the vacancy would be filled by basically a state party delegate convention of the party of the secretary or the commissioner of insurance or the state treasurer. That's the gist of the bill.
All right, thank you, Revisor Heim. The chair now recognizes Representative Berquist.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we pass 2051 out as presented favorably for passage on the House floor.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Do I have a second? I see a second from Representative Topliker. Discussion Committee. Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quick, want to clarify, do we need to make that motion as amended? I believe we did amend the bill last time.
Yes, as amended. Thank you.
Did we amend it last time? That is correct.
Okay. And I also want to speak beyond that, but first I just want to second that point, make sure we get that right.
Yes, you are correct, and we should hopefully have the most recent language, I think, in front of us.
And then, not to complicate things further, but Mr. Chair, I have an amendment.
All right. While the committee is receiving that amendment, would you like to explain your amendment?
Sure. We have in statute a pretty clear process for democratically replacing vacancies at this high of a level in the state of Kansas. We went through this with our congressional special election when Congressman Pompeo was appointed to the Trump administration. So this amendment would apply that same special election procedure to vacancies in the two offices addressed in this bill. So it would be an almost immediate triggering of a special election, just like a vacancy in one of our congressional seats. We would provide the same timeline to make sure there's time for military ballots to be printed and mailed, but ultimately follow the same procedures of the congressional special election.
Okay, just to make sure I'm understanding, you're changing it into an appointment basically like by the state delegation, and instead you're doing a special election for those individuals?
Correct. And the reason for that is because the testimony that we heard in support of this was pushing for a modification that would be more reflective of the electorate as a whole. And I believe the idea that was suggested many times was to have a more democratic, small d democratic process. And this would be, basically the most democratic process that we could have to fill these vacancies. I also wanted to give us an example that clearly exists for an office of this level that we already have, so that I know we had some issues trying to clarify some of our definitions last time and figure out how it would work to apply sort of that precinct level election all the way up for an office this high. This would give us an already high level office standard where we can just use those same procedures.
Okay, so I believe I might have the wrong amendment that was sent to me. Because the balloon amendment that I'm looking at right now is in regards to, if I can find it. Okay, it's a balloon amendment, and it's in regard to appointment of a suitable person and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's the right language. But I do have a second from Representative Miller on the Parker amendment.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I probably should have paused long enough for a second there.
You're okay.
If the committee secretary could send out the substitute bill that I emailed her earlier today to the committee and the staff. That's what Representative Parker is referring to.
Thank you, Revisor Heim. Dana, when you get a chance, please email that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Representative Lehan?
is the bill that is on the Kansas Legislature website, is that the bill with the amendment that we had passed last week, your balloon amendment? I just want to make sure I'm looking at the most up-to-date before we add this new amendment.
I do not believe so. Revisor Heim, have you had the ability to update and send us the revised language when we took a break?
He did that this afternoon. It was an email from him on what we did last meeting.
I'm looking for his email real quick. My ranking member says that Revisor Heim did send that email out earlier this afternoon.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I sent it to your secretary and told her to wait until this meeting to send it out.
Okay, so Dana, could you please send out the current bill language as it was amended last Thursday? So Revisor Heim, the committee assistant is saying that she only received 2 items from you, and both of those were in regard to the balloon amendment and Representative Parker's amendment.
That's correct. Refresh my memory in terms of what the amendment was at the last meeting on Thursday.
The amendment was regarding the majority vote requirement at one of these conventions, and additionally secret ballot language that like we see for precinct committee people currently.
Let me look for that. I apologize for not having it at my fingertips.
All right, we will go ahead and pause until the revisor can get us the most recent language for the bill that we had already amended last Thursday. Committee stand by. Once we have that, then we will begin discussion on the Parker amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Revisor.
the balloon amendment that was adopted should be coming to your secretary here in just a minute. If she can forward it on to the committee again, I think be able to proceed.
So so it's the original balloon amendment that you sent Thursday, and we don't have an updated bill?
The bill will not be updated until it's actually passed out of committee.
Okay. So we will go ahead and wait then for we've got a high-pitched squeak coming in from Mike Himes' mic for some reason, even though it says he's muted. Okay. All right, so every committee, you should have just gotten the amendment that we passed out Thursday. It's inserting a new section B. According to the revisor, the bill does not get updated until we pass it out of committee. So that is a refresher of what we've already added to the bill as amended. So I believe the vice chair made a motion to pass it out as amended. So this is what's already previously been amended into the bill. So with that, we are now on the Parker Amendment, which I'm getting it pulled up now. All right, so everybody should have the Parker Amendment pulled up. So what we are going to do, there's been a second by Representative Miller. We are on discussion. Representative Proctor.
So before we start discussion, Mr. Chairman, the amendment that he just sent out, if I remember correctly, we replaced committeeman and committeewoman with state delegates, and I just want to make clear that that's the amendment that's the current state of the bill. Is that correct?
That is correct, Representative.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I do not support the Parker Amendment. I feel like you're creating a huge burden on the state to convene an entire special election. We don't have a fiscal note on this amendment that Representative Parker's proposed, but I think that it would be a huge cost, whereas the bill as it currently stands with state delegates, it costs the state nothing. It's run by the party. And so I rise in opposition to this amendment.
Further discussion on the Parker Amendment. The chair recognizes Representative Toplicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, in Representative Parker's amendment, does it call for a timeline where if it happens before half the term is up? I can't, for some reason, I can't get it pulled up in front of me, but the question is there like a timeline where if it's over half the term, then there's an appointment, but if it's before half of the term is up, then it's if it's before, it's an appointment. If it's after, it's or before it's an election, you get the point. Sorry.
I think I understand your question. I may defer to the revisor on some of the specifics of this, but the intent is that almost no matter when it occurs that we would go ahead and have the special election. Now, once you get into the year of the actual election, that gets, you start running up against the actual election. I believe the language is that if it's leading into that primary election, then we go along with the normal year of election. But again, I want to defer to the revisor on that. We've been working on this for about a week and a half here, but I got it yesterday and I'm going over the details with you. But my understanding with the way that it works on the congressional statute is that until it gets pretty close to that actual election at the end of the term, it would trigger it. Revisor Heim, could you speak to what that timeline looks like?
I will allow the revisor to weigh in on this question, but in the future, please make sure that it's acceptable. Thank you.
I believe Representative Parker stated it correctly.
All right, thank you, revisor. All right, committee, further debate on the Parker Amendment. I am not seeing any further debate. Representative Parker, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for that. I would just close in summarizing this if the aim is to make this process more democratic, this is as democratic as we can make it. I don't think it will be a large burden to the state, as hopefully we aren't having too many vacancies in these offices moving forward to begin with. But if we want to improve upon the democratic nature of the current process, I think this is ultimately the way to go. We have a tried and tested system. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We've done this for other vacancies. I think if we're going to adjust the way that we treat these vacancies, we should go with the system that we have and that we know works and gives all voters of Kansas a chance to participate. And with that, I would move my amendment.
Thank you, Representative. Real quick, before we go to the vote, I would like the committee secretary to please mark in the minutes that Representative Bishop is not in the Capitol building and is unable to vote on these issues today. But she is tuned in. She is here, but she's ineligible to vote. With that, committee, all those who are in favor of the Parker Amendment, please raise your right hand and keep them in the air. All those opposed, please raise your right hand, keep them in the air. All right, by my count, the vote is 2-8. The nays have it. Representative Parker, do you wish to proceed?
No, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the consideration of my amendment. With the failure of that, I prefer the current statute to the bill as it stands. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Is there further discussion on this bill? Seeing none. Representative Berquist, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I close.
Committee, all those in favor of House Bill 2051 as amended, please raise your right hand and keep it in the air. All those opposed, please raise your right hand and keep it in the air. By my count, the vote is 8-2. The ayes have it. House Bill 2051 is passed. Representative, would you like your vote recorded? And wave it like you just don't care. All right, so thank you, committee. We went a little bit long today, so I appreciate your participation. With that, we are adjourned.